Good morning. As we all know, whenever we need to start up with our organization or when we need to start with our enterprise, we have to raise the funds. The amount of money that is being invested in the business to start a business, it is known as capital. So there are different sources of finance which we can use to raise the amount required to set up our business. So today in this video we will try to understand what are the different sources or which are the different sources through which we can raise the finance. Now depending upon different basis we can classify finance into three different types. First is basis of time. Now depending upon the time duration for which we are going to raise the money or for which we are going to raise the funds, it is divided into short term, medium term and long term source of financing. Now short term sources are raised for a period of 1 year. The example for short term are bills payable, creditors, bills discounting, trade credit. If we are going to raise the money from 1 to 5 years of duration, that is classified under medium term sources of finance. Example for medium term are preferentials, lease financing, debentures. And if you are going to raise the money for a time duration of more than 5 years, say up to 10-20 years or more than that, it is classified under long term sources of financing. The example for that is equity shares, preference shares, venture funding, term loans, etc. The second classification depends upon the ownership and control. Now, ownership and control divide the sources into two different types, that is owned funds and borrowed funds. Now, owned funds are the funds which belongs to the owners of the organization, and borrowed fund is the money which is being borrowed from outsider. Now, the example for own fund is equity shares, preference shares, convertible debentures, and borrowed funds are loans from financial institutions or from the banks, or debenture is also one of the form of borrowed funds. Next classification depends upon the source of generation, that is from where the source or the money is generated. It is of two different types. First is internal and second is external source. Now internal source of finance means the money which is generated out of the business activity and which is again invested in the business. It creates the internal source of finance. An external source of finance is the amount of finance that is being raised from outsider. For example, under internal source we have retained earnings. Now what are retained earnings? It is a part of profit that is not distributed to investor and it is kept with the organization, which is again invested back in the organization. It is known as retained earning, which creates the internal source of finance. And second is external source. The example for that is equity shares, preference shares, which is borrowed from outsiders. So these are three different types of sources of finance. In this video, we are going to focus upon the long-term sources of finance, and the long-term source of finance is divided into three different types: own fund, borrowed fund and other sources. As I already told you, own funds are the funds which belongs to the owners of the organization. Borrowed funds are the funds which are being borrowed from outsiders, and other sources we have lease financing and higher purchasing. Now in this video we are going to focus upon the owned funds. So under own funds we have equity shares and preference shares. Now before moving to equity shares, let's try to understand what is share. When we say that the amount which is being invested in a business is known as capital, and when this capital is divided into smaller equal part, a single part is known as a share which has got the same value as other parts of capital. So it is a part of capital which has smallest part of capital which has got the equal value. Now the shares are of two different types, equity shares and preference shares. Now what are equity shares? The equity shares or the shareholders are the real owners or the residual owners of the organization. Now why they are real owners? Because they are going to have the ownership according to or in proportion of their investment in an organization. Or why they are known as residual owners? Now what is residue? It is the leftover part. As we all know, we invest our money to get the returns on our investment. Now the shareholder gets the dividend from the organization in the form of returns. What is dividend? It is a part of profit that is given to these shareholders. Now equity shareholders are the last one to receive the benefits from the organization. That is, at the end of the financial year, whatever profit is being generated, that is firstly utilized to pay the taxes, to settle down the losses. The dividend is given to the preference shareholders. Interest is paid to the financial institution from where the finance is raised. It is being given to the debentures, and after distribution of all these things, if the money is left with the organization, then it is passed on to the equity shares in the form of dividend. They are going to get the leftover part, and that is why they are known as the residual. That is, the remaining things or the remaining profit is passed on to these people, and that is why they are known as residual owners of the organization. Now what are the features of equity shares? First feature is maturity. Now as we have already seen, there are different types of sources of finance, that is medium term, long term and short term. It depends upon the time duration. Now what is maturity? For example, if you have raised a loan from a financial institution or from banks for 5 years, at the end of 5th year we have to give back the principal amount which we have taken in the form of loan. Similarly, for other sources also, it has got a maturity period. At the end of the maturity period, the principal amount is to be redeemed back to these investors. But in case of equity shares, there is no maturity period. Equity shares are going to remain in the organization in the form of investment till the organization exists. And that is why equity shares are also known as permanent source of capital for the organization. The next feature is claim on income. Equity shareholders cannot claim on the income of the organization until the benefits are passed on to other investors. I explained to you, they are the residual owner. That means they get everything after the benefits are distributed to other investors. That is, they cannot claim for any income. Next is cost of equity. Now the cost of equity is very less. It is very easy to raise the equity shares as the face value of the share is very low. That means it may be 10 rupees, it may be 100 rupees, and it is very easy for a general or a common man to invest in any organization in the form of equity, as the cost of equity is very less. Next is claim on asset. Again, equity shareholders cannot claim on asset. For example, when we raise the loan or when we raise the debentures, we have to give some assets as collateral security. But in case of equity shares, there is no need to give any security in the form of assets to these shareholders. Next, as we know that equity shareholders are the owners of the organization. They get the ownership in the proportion of their investment, and that is why they can control the working of the organization. Next feature is preemptive rights. Now what are preemptive rights? If the owner or if a business person feels the or there is a need to raise more capital for the organization, Firstly, the owner would be approaching the existing shareholders for further investment. If they wish, they can invest more in the organization. So, the priority is given to the existing shareholders for more investment in the organization. If they deny to organization more amount, then the owner is going to raise the amount from other sources, and this is known as preemptive right. That is, they get the priority for investing more in the organization. Now, as we know, every coin has got two sides. If there are advantages, there are disadvantages of equity shares as well. Now, firstly, we will see what are the advantages. First is capital profit. As I told you, equity share is a permanent source of capital. A shareholder cannot withdraw the principal amount from the organization or cannot redeem the capital amount back till the organization is running. So, what a shareholder can do if the company is in a boom period, that means the market prices for the shares are at the highest level. In such situation, the shareholder can sell the shares to other investors and get the lump sum amount in the form of capital profit, and that is the advantage to equity shareholders. Next advantage to equity shareholder is interest in management and company's activity. As they are the owners of the company, they can participate in annual general meetings, they can alter the management policies, they can take the interest in company's activities that are going on, and then they can give their own opinions. Next, they get more income in comparison to other investors. Though they are the residual owners, that means leftover things are passed on to these people, but they can get highest benefits as well, because the amount of dividend is not fixed for equity shares. It depends upon the amount of income or amount of profit the company is going to generate. If in any year, if company generates a huge profit, other investors are going to get the fixed returns, but equity shareholders are going to get all the benefit that is being left with the organization, so they can enjoy maximum benefits from the organization. As I already told you, it is best for the investment because the face value of shares are very less. It may be 10 rupees, 100 rupees, or 500. So, a common man can also invest in the form of equity shares. These are the benefits for the investors. Again, there are some benefits for company as well if they raise in the form of equity shares. The first benefit is there is no fixed burden. Now, fixed burden is it is not mandatory for an organization to pay dividend every year to the equity shareholders. It is not at all compulsory. If the organization or if the owner feels that instead of giving dividend to equity share, they are going to retain in the form of retained earnings, which would be again invested back in the organization, still equity shareholders cannot claim for their income, and that is a benefit for organization. There is no cash outflow. The reason for that is even if the dividend is paid, that is paid to the equity shareholders, and equity shareholders are the owners of the organization. So the money is not going out of the organization, it is in the hands of the owners itself. Already I told you it is a permanent source of capital. You cannot redeem the principal amount back. It is simple and cheap source, so it is very easy for the organization to raise more amount in the form of equity shares. And very importantly, it increases the debt capacity. Any investors, those who are going to invest in the form of loan or debentures, they are going to see the equity base of the organization. If the company has got a huge equity base, considering equity base, the debenture holders or the financial institutions are going to invest in the organization because they feel that their investment is secured, as they are going to get the fixed returns from the organization because they have a huge equity base. So these are the advantages of equity shares. Now, what are the disadvantages? The first disadvantage of Equity share is uncertainty and irregular income. As I told you, it is not mandatory for an organization to pay the dividend every year. So, equity shareholders may not get the regular dividend from the organization, and as I told you, the amount of dividend is also not fixed. The percentage of dividend that would be paid is also not fixed. So the amount which the dividend the shareholders would be getting is uncertain and irregular. They may have the capital loss also. For example, if company is running in loss, the share prices are going to fall down, and in such situation, if the shareholder sells the shares, they are not going to get the profit, so they are going to bear the capital loss. It is less attractive to modest investors. That means those who don't wish to take the risk, it is not preferable for such investors to invest in the equity share, because equity shareholders are the residual. Every benefit they are going to get at the end, so they have to bear the risk. In case of liquidation also, which is the next point, in case of liquidation also, equity shareholders may have to bear the loss. At the liquidation, whatever principal amount is there with the owner, that would be firstly distributed to other investors, and if anything is left, then it would be given to the equity share, and if nothing is left, no principal amount would be given back to the equity shares. So they are the risk bearer, and that is why it is not attractive for the modest investors, those who are not willing to take the risk. Next is centralization of control. Now it is a disadvantage for the company, because as equity shareholders are the owners of the organization, they may interfere in working of the management, they may take the control of the organization, and they may change or may alter the company policy, which is not beneficial for the, or which is not good for the organization. And with the help of equity share, it is difficult to remove overcapitalization. Now, in simple terms, overcapitalization is a condition in which the amount of profit which an organization must have earned is less in comparison to investment. This is the simplest concept of overcapitalization. For example, if you were expecting 100 rupees returns on 1000's investment, and it is possible that you may have earned 80 rupees, so whatever you have invested accordingly, you have not received the benefit or the profit. This is known as overcapitalization. Now, to correct overcapitalization, what we can do is we can redeem the principal amount back. For example, if you have preference shares or if you have debentures, you can redeem the principal amount back, and this way you can reduce the principal amount and you can justify the amount of profit you have earned. But with the help of equity shares, it is difficult, because equity share being permanent source of capital, it is not possible to redeem or to give back the principal amount to equity shareholders, and because of which it is difficult to remove the overcapitalization of the company. Next type of share is preference shares. Now, why the name preference shares? Preference shares name is given just because they get the preference or priority over the equity shareholders for getting the benefits, and that is why it is so said as preference shares. And we can see that preference capital represents a hybrid form of financing. Now, why hybrid form? Because it has got some characteristics of equity shares and some characteristics of debentures. Now it resembles equity shares in following ways. First, dividend is not a obligatory payment. As we have seen, in case of equity share, it is not compulsory for organization to pay dividend. Similarly, for preference share also, it is not mandatory for organization to pay the dividend. Second point, which is common to equity share, is the preference dividend is not tax deductible. Now, what is tax deductible? For example, x amount you have to pay as for example, if you have to pay the amount of tax on x amount, Now, in case of debentures, whatever returns you are giving in the form of interest, the amount of interest can be deducted from the total amount, and on remaining part you are going to pay the tax. But in case of preference shares and equity shares, the amount of dividend which is being paid to these shareholders, you cannot reduce or you cannot deduct it from the profit. So the company has to pay the tax on the amount of dividend which is being given to these people. Now, the similarity between debentures and preference shares. First, the amount of dividend is fixed, that is fixed rate of dividend is given to preference shareholder. That is, when we raise the amount in the form of preference shares, we are going to fix the returns that would be paid. That is, it may be 10%, 15%. So whatever profit the company is going to earn, out of that 10% would be given in the form of preference shares, which is similar to the debenture holder. Second thing, they can claim on the assets. For example, at the time of liquidation, or if the company is not able to redeem the principal amount back, preference shareholders can claim on any asset and they can recover their principal amount back. And third point, which is similar to debentures, is they don't carry any voting right as in case of equity shareholders. So, and that is why preference shares is known as hybrid form of financing. Now, what are the features of preference shares? The first feature of preference shares is accumulation of dividends. Now, as we have seen, it is not mandatory for an organization to pay the dividend to the preference shareholders, but if the company is not able to pay the dividend in particular financial year, that same dividend can be given in next year. That is, you are going to accumulate the dividend and that dividend would be paid with the dividend of next year, and that is the feature of preference shares. Next, convertibility. Preference shares, convertible preference shares have an option of converting the preference shares in the form of equity shares. Next is redeemability. Now, redeemability, that is, preference shares have got a fixed maturity period, that is, say up to 5 years, 6 years or 7 years, for whatever time you have raised the money in the form of preference shares, the principal amount would be redeemed back after that particular period of time. And next is voting right. Generally, preference shareholders don't carry any voting right, but under certain situation and under the rules of Companies Act, preference shareholders may get voting rights in the condition if the company is not able to pay the dividend for 2 or more consecutive years. In such situation, preference shareholders get the voting rights from the company. So these are the features of preference shares. Now, there are different types of preference shares. First is cumulative and non-cumulative. As I already explained you, cumulative preference shareholders means these are the shareholders which are going to get the benefit of accumulation of dividend. That is, if in previous year, if the company has not paid the dividend, this year cumulative preference shareholders are going to get the benefits of dividend of previous years plus this year's dividend. But in case of non-cumulative preference shares, if the company was not able to pay the dividend in the previous year, preference shareholders have to let go the previous year's dividend. They are just going to get the benefit of this year's profit. Second is redeemable and irredeemable. Redeemable means to give the principal amount back. That is, at the maturity period, preference shareholders are going to get they are going to get their principal amount back. And if you are investing in the form of irredeemable preference shares, it is going to remain with the organization till the company exists, which is similar to equity share. That is, it forms a permanent source of capital. Next is convertible and non-convertible. Convertible preference shareholders have an option to convert preference shares in the form of equity, while non-convertible preference shares remain as preference shares till it is invested in the organization. Next is participating and non-participating. Now, as I told you, preference shareholders have got fixed rate of getting the benefit from the organization, that may be 10%, 15%, 5%. So accordingly, they are going to get the benefits from the organization. But in case of participating preference shares, after getting the fixed amount of benefit, whatever amount would be left, again from that amount also preference shares are going to enjoy the benefit. That means other than the fixed rate of benefit, they are also going to get the extra amount of profit from the company, and they are known as participating preference shares. And for non-participating preference shares, they are going to get the fixed percentage of benefits from the organization. Next, we are going to study what are the advantages and disadvantages of preference shares. Now, the first advantage is priority in repayment of capital. As I already told you, the name preference shares is given because they get the priority over equity shares. So, in case of repayment of capital also, in case of liquidation, these are the shareholders which are going to get the priority over equity shares in getting the repayment of capital. Second is best security. Now, preference shareholders or the preference shares are best for the investment for those who don't want to bear the risk, but at the same time they want to get the regular income. So that is the best security for such investors. Next is it has got a regular and fixed income. As I told you, at the time of raising of preference share itself, the amount or the percentage of dividend is fixed and they are going to get the dividend on regular basis. In previous slide we have seen that it is not mandatory for organization to pay the dividend, but to maintain the goodwill in the organization or to maintain the good image in the market, the company has to give the regular income to the preference shareholder, and that is advantage to these people. They are going to get a regular and a fixed income. Next, safety of interest. Now, as I already told you, they are going to get the preference over the equity shareholders, and that is why they are always safe. They are going to get the repayment of capital and they are going to get the regular and fixed income. Now, there is no interference in management, and that is advantage to the company because these people are not the owners of the organization and they don't have any kind of voting rights, so they cannot interfere in working of management, and they cannot charge on asset, that is they are not going to get any kind of collateral security from the organization. So again, that is the advantage to the company. Now, the disadvantages. The first disadvantage is dividend at fixed rate. Now, preference shareholders get a fixed rate of dividend. If the company, for example, if the company has earned 100 rupees profit in this year, so out of that 100, a fixed percentage, say 5%. So 5% of 100 rupees would be the benefit that would be passed on to the preference share. If next year, if a company earns 500 rupees or 5 lakh rupees, it does not matter. Again, the preference shareholders is going to get the 5% out of that earning. So even if the company's earning keeps on raising, the amount of dividend is fixed. So that is a disadvantage, except for the participating type of preference shares. Only participating types of preference shares get the extra advantage, that is they can participate in extra profit which is being earned by the organization. But other types of preference shares, they get a fixed rate of dividend whatever amount the company has earned in the form of profit. Next is uncertain position of redeemable preference shares. Even if we say that the preference shares are redeemable, but when to return the principal amount or when to return the capital amount is in the hands of the company. It may happen if the maturity period of preference shares is of 5 years, the company may redeem the preference share before 5 years, or it may redeem after 6 or 7 years also. So the position of these preference shares are uncertain. Next, they have limited voting rights. On regular basis, they don't get any kind of voting rights, but in certain situation, as I already explained you, if the company is not able to pay the dividend for 2 or more consecutive years, then these people get the preference, then these people get the voting rights, but that too limited, which are not similar to the equity shareholders. Now, the disadvantage for company is company has got a fixed economic burden. That is, they have to regularly give a fixed amount to these people, even if company is not earning enough of profit, or even if company is in loss, they have to give the returns to the preference shareholders. Next, it is a disadvantage to the equity shareholders, because preference shareholders get the preference or priority over equity shareholders in all the situation. It may be in the form of getting dividend, or it may be in the form of getting the capital amount back. Priority is given to preference shareholders, and that is why equity shareholders have to bear the risk. And very importantly, preference shares, if we going to raise the investment in the form of preference share, company has to bear high cost of capital, because there is no tax deductibility option. I already explained you what is tax deductibility. That is the amount of dividend which is paid to preference shareholders. On that amount also the company has to pay the tax. So it is a double loss, because you are going to pay the tax also, and money is going out of the organization in the form of dividend. So that is a disadvantage to the company. So in this video, we have understood different types of sources of finance from which the company can raise the money for investing in the business, and especially we have focused upon the long term sources of finance, which is the own source of finance. Thank you.